It was 1989. In the heart of Nairobi, Kenya's capital city, the government announced an ambitious new project. A towering office complex would rise in Uhuru Park. To some people, it sounded like progress. A modern building. New offices. A sign that Kenya was moving forward. But one woman saw something very different. Her name was Wangari Maathai. She believed this was not just about a building. It was about a place that belonged to every Kenyan. Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. Uhuru Park had become a symbol of the nation's independence. Families gathered there. Children played there. Citizens celebrated there. It reminded Kenyans that freedom belonged to the people. Wangari believed that if a place like this could be taken away, then something much greater than a park was at risk. She spoke out. She wrote letters. She challenged powerful politicians. Many dismissed her. Some mocked her. Others called her a troublemaker. But she refused to be silent. One woman had chosen to stand against some of the most powerful people in her country. Why? Why would a university professor risk her career, her reputation, even her safety, for a public park? To answer that question, we must travel back to a small village in the green highlands of central Kenya. A place where a young girl learned that the health of the land and the future of its people could never be separated. Welcome to the African Archive, where we bring Africa's history to life through carefully researched and compelling storytelling. If you enjoy documentaries about the remarkable people, kingdoms, and events that shaped Africa, subscribe and join us as we continue uncovering the continent's extraordinary past. This is the story of Wangari Maathai, the woman who planted a movement. Chapter 1. The girl who loved the forest. Long before the world knew her name. Long before she challenged presidents and powerful politicians. Wangari Maathai was a little girl growing up in the village of Ihide, in the green highlands of central Kenya. She was born on April 1, 1940. Her family were farmers. Like most families in the village, they depended on the land for almost everything. The forest provided firewood. The rivers provided clean water. The soil produced food. Nature was not something people visited. It was something they lived with every single day. As a child, Wangari loved being outdoors. She walked beneath tall trees whose branches seemed to touch the sky. She watched clear streams flowing gently over smooth stones. She listened to birds singing as the morning sun rose above the hills. The world around her felt full of life. Her mother often reminded her to respect the land. She taught her that healthy forests protected the rivers. Trees held the soil together during heavy rains. When the land was cared for, families had food to eat and clean water to drink. Everything in nature was connected. Those lessons became part of Wangari's life. Although she could not know it then, they would one day shape a movement that would inspire millions. But even as a young girl, she began to notice small changes. Some familiar trees disappeared. Parts of the forest were cleared. Streams that had once flowed throughout the year became smaller. She did not yet understand the reasons. She only knew that something beautiful was slowly fading away. Unlike many girls of her generation, Wangari was given the opportunity to go to school. At that time, many families believed boys should receive more education than girls. Girls were often expected to stay home and help with household work. But Wangari's family believed education mattered. She threw herself into her studies. She loved asking questions. She worked hard in every subject. Her teachers quickly recognized her talent. They saw a bright young student with an eagerness to learn that seemed to have no limits. Every examination she passed opened another door. Every lesson gave her greater confidence. Soon, an opportunity arrived that very few young Kenyans could even dream about. It would take her thousands of kilometers away from the forest she loved, to a country she had never seen. And there, she would begin to discover that knowledge could be just as powerful as courage. Chapter 2. A World Beyond the Village. In the early 1960s, Wangari Maathai received an opportunity that would change her life forever. She was awarded a scholarship to study in the United States. For a young woman who had grown up in a small farming village, it was almost unbelievable. She had never traveled so far from home. She was leaving her family, her country, and the forest that had shaped her childhood. The scholarship was part of a program that helped talented East African students study overseas. Many of these students would later return to help build newly independent African nations. When Wangari arrived in America, she stepped into a completely different world. The cities were larger than anything she had known. The universities welcomed students from many countries. The classrooms were filled with new ideas. She studied biology, the science of living things. As she learned about plants, animals, and ecosystems, she began to understand something she had sensed as a child. Everything in nature is connected. Healthy forests protect rivers. Healthy rivers support farms. Healthy farms feed families. Science gave her the knowledge to explain what her heart had always known. But those years gave her something else. They gave her confidence. She realized that a young woman from rural Kenya could succeed anywhere through hard work and determination. After completing her studies in the United States, Wangari continued her education in Germany, where she expanded her scientific knowledge even further. Then she returned home. Kenya had gained its independence in 1963. The country was full of hope. People believed they could now build a better future with their own hands. Wangari joined the University of Nairobi as a lecturer. She continued her studies and made history by becoming one of the first women in East and Central Africa to earn a Doctor of Philosophy, also called a PhD, the highest academic degree awarded by a university. It was an extraordinary achievement. She could have spent the rest of her life teaching and carrying out scientific research. But as she traveled across Kenya, she noticed something that troubled her. The forests she had known as a child were shrinking. Trees were disappearing. Rivers that once flowed strongly were becoming smaller. The soil was losing its richness. Women in rural communities told her they had to walk further every year to collect firewood. Some struggled to find clean water. Others found it harder to grow enough food for their families. To many people, these were separate problems. To Wangari, they were all connected. She realized that the future of Kenya depended not only on political independence, but also on the health of its land. She could no longer remain only a scientist. The knowledge she had gained carried a responsibility. She had to act. And that action would begin with something so simple that few people believed it could change a nation. A single tree. Chapter 3. Planting a movement. By the 1970s, Wangari Maathai had seen enough. As a scientist, she understood what was happening to Kenya's environment. As a Kenyan, she could see the effect on ordinary families. Where forests had once stood, there were empty fields. Where rivers had once flowed, there were streams that grew smaller each year. The soil was becoming weaker. Harvests were getting smaller. But it was the voices of rural women that affected her the most. Wherever she traveled, they told her the same story. They had to walk longer distances to collect firewood. Finding clean water was becoming more difficult. Their farms produced less food than before. Every day seemed harder than the last. Many people blamed poverty. Others blamed bad weather. Wangari believed they were looking at the problem from the wrong direction. She believed the land itself was crying out for help. Without trees, rain washed away the rich topsoil. Without healthy soil, crops struggled to grow. Without forests, rivers slowly dried up. The problems were all connected. Then an idea came to her. It was so simple that many people overlooked it. What if ordinary people could restore the land themselves? In 1977, Wangari founded the Green Belt movement. She encouraged women to plant trees in their villages. Not hundreds at first. Just one. Then another. Then another. She taught them how to collect seeds, how to grow young trees, called seedlings, and how to care for them until they were strong enough to survive on their own. The results surprised many people. The trees helped protect the soil. They helped restore water sources. Families had easier access to firewood. Women earned small incomes by raising and selling seedlings. But something even more important was happening. People who had once believed they could do nothing discovered they could make a difference. The Green Belt movement became more than an environmental project. It became a movement built on hope. It taught people that they did not have to wait for someone else to solve their problems. They could begin with their own hands. One tree at a time. The movement spread from one village to another. Then across Kenya. Thousands of people joined. Soon, millions of trees had been planted. But as Wangari traveled across the country, she noticed something troubling. Sometimes, people planted trees, only to see them cut down again. She began asking why. The answers led her to an uncomfortable truth. The greatest threat to Kenya's forest was not ordinary people. It was the decisions being made by powerful people. And before long, Wangari Maathai would find herself standing face to face with them. Chapter 4. When trees became freedom. By the late 1980s, Wangari Maathai had planted thousands of trees. The Green Belt movement was growing. Communities across Kenya were restoring damaged land. But Wangari had come to understand something important. Planting trees alone would not save Kenya's forest. If powerful people continue to take public land for private projects, the destruction would never end. That truth became impossible to ignore in 1989. The Kenyan government announced plans to build a massive office complex in Uhuru Park, in the center of Nairobi. To some people, it sounded like a sign of progress. A modern city needed modern buildings. But Wangari saw something very different. Uhuru means freedom in Swahili. Uhuru Park was more than an open space. It was where Kenyans gathered to celebrate their independence. Families spent time there. Children played there. Citizens met there. It belonged to everyone. Wangari believed that if the people could lose a place that symbolized their freedom, they could slowly lose the freedom it represented. She spoke out. She wrote letters to government officials. She appealed to international organizations. She warned that once the park was destroyed, it could never truly be replaced. Many people dismissed her. Some newspapers criticized her. Powerful politicians accused her of standing in the way of development. She was insulted, threatened, mocked. But she refused to back down. Months passed. Public pressure continued to grow. People inside and outside Kenya began asking why a public park should be sacrificed for a private development. Eventually, the project was abandoned. It was an extraordinary victory. One determined woman had helped protect one of Kenya's most important public spaces. But Wangari knew the struggle was not over. A few years later, another battle began. This time, it was over Karura Forest, one of the last remaining forests near Nairobi. Part of the forest had been allocated for private development. Once again, Wangari organized peaceful protests. She stood with students, community members, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens. They carried no weapons. Only banners. Only their voices. The response was violent. Supporters of the development attacked the protesters. Wangari herself was beaten and injured. Many people would have given up after such an attack. She did not. Instead, she stood up once more. The images of her courage spread across the world. People began to understand that Wangari Maathai was not simply fighting for trees. She was fighting for honesty, for public accountability, for the right of ordinary citizens to protect what belonged to them all. The forest had become a symbol. And so had she. Before long, the world would honor her courage in a way no African woman had experienced before. Chapter 5. The world listened. By the early 2000s, Wangari Maathai's message had traveled far beyond Kenya. What had begun with a handful of women planting trees had become an international movement. People from around the world came to learn from the Green Belt movement. They wanted to understand how something so simple could change so many lives. Wangari's answer was always the same. When people care for the land, they also care for one another. She explained that protecting forests was not only about trees. It was about clean water, healthy farms, enough food, strong communities, and peaceful societies. She believed that people who had hope for the future were less likely to fight over shrinking resources. To her, peace began with justice. And justice began with giving people the opportunity to care for the place they called home. Then, in 2002, another chapter of her life began. After years of speaking out against poor leadership, Wangari was elected to Kenya's parliament. For the first time, she could help shape government policy from inside the very system she had spent years challenging. She later served as an assistant minister for environment and natural resources. Even in government, she remained the same person. She continued encouraging communities to plant trees. She continued defending Kenya's forest. She continued reminding leaders that development should never come at the cost of destroying the environment. Then came the moment that surprised the world. In 2004, Wangari Maathai was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. She became the first African woman ever to receive the honor. The Nobel Committee recognized something many people had never considered before: protecting the environment, promoting human rights, encouraging democracy, and building peace. We're all connected. For Wangari, the award was never a personal victory. She accepted it on behalf of the women who had planted trees, the communities that had restored damaged land, and the ordinary people who had refused to believe that their actions were too small to matter. Standing before the world, she carried a message that was both simple and powerful. No matter how difficult the problem seems, someone must be willing to take the first step. Sometimes that first step is a speech. Sometimes it is an act of courage. And sometimes it is planting a single tree. By then, Wangari Maathai had become one of Africa's most respected voices. But she believed her work was far from finished. She knew that the greatest legacy is not the awards a person receives. It is the lives they change. And that legacy was still growing. Chapter 6. The forest she left behind. By the time Wangari Maathai reached the final years of her life, the movement she had started had spread far beyond Kenya. The Green Belt movement had helped communities plant tens of millions of trees. Land that had once been damaged was beginning to recover. Streams that had almost disappeared were flowing again in some places. Women who had once struggled to earn an income had found new opportunities through raising and selling tree seedlings. But Wangari believed that trees were never the greatest achievement. People were. She had watched ordinary citizens discover that they could change their own communities. She had seen women, who were often ignored, become leaders. She had shown that lasting change does not always begin in government offices. Sometimes it begins in villages, on farms, in neighborhoods. One person inspires another, then another, until a movement is born. Even after receiving the Nobel Peace Prize, Wangari continued to speak wherever she was invited. She encouraged young people to care for the environment. She reminded leaders that economic progress should never come at the cost of destroying nature. And she warned that future generations would pay the price if the earth was treated as something to be used without care. On September 25, 2011, Wangari Maathai died after battling cancer. She was 71 years old. Kenya mourned the loss of one of its most courageous daughters. Tributes came from every corner of the world. World leaders praised her courage. Environmental groups honored her vision. But perhaps her greatest memorial was not a statue or a building. It was the millions of trees still standing because one woman believed they mattered. Today, Wangari Maathai's influence can still be seen across Africa and beyond. Her work continues through the Green Belt movement. Her ideas continue to inspire people fighting to protect forests, rivers, and wildlife. Her life reminds us that caring for the environment is not only about saving nature. It is about protecting people, protecting communities, and protecting the future. Thank you for joining us on the African Archive as we explore the remarkable life of Wangari Maathai. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe to the African Archive and turn on notifications. Together, we'll continue uncovering the people, kingdoms, and events that shaped Africa and continue to shape our world. Some people change history with armies. Some change it through politics. Wangari Maathai changed it with courage, compassion, and the simple belief that every great forest begins with a single tree.